Welcome to the Difference Makers. I'm Lynn Sanders, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's topic is Behind the Scenes with an Award winning author. How many of you listening have ever wanted to become an author? What does it take? How do you become an award winning author? What are the types of books that you can write? And even more, what lessons can you learn from an award winning author today that you can apply to your life? So I'm really thrilled to have Marlene Brill with me, a fellow writer from Illinois who's written more books than anyone I know. She's published 73 books and she's on another one. 74 is coming up. And she's going to give us her story as well as her insights. So, welcome, Marlene.
Thank you for having me, Lynn.
I am so happy you made it. So, tell me, how did you get to be an award-winning author? What's your story to where you got to be where you are right now?
Well, as most things in my life, it was not a straight journey. Um, I used to be a special educator, and my last full time, I was a curriculum specialist, so I wrote curriculum. I also, my last full time job was as a media coordinator, which for special ed school district, which meant I did newsletters, still curriculum. I did back in the olden days a slide tape scripts. I would send out press releases. I did the whole gamut, which was wonderful practice for me. And then this was the 70s when all those middle level jobs were getting cut out. So I immediately, which was so lucky for me, got two freelance jobs. And I thought, hey, I know publishers like to hire former teachers, especially to write curriculum. I'll just offer myself up to publishing. Well, I was able to get a job, but they wanted me to start right at the beginning. And I had already spent 13 years in special ed. And I saw lots of crummy books in the classroom and thought I could write better. So I just decided to go out on my own. And it was really uh, exciting and scary too. And so I wound up doing all kinds of writing from newsletters to press releases to scripts to I'm trying to remember. There was some. I even wrote scripts for people who were presenting in at conferences, like the Secretary of the Treasury under Carter. I was able to interview her and write her words for an event. I mean, things that I never would have dreamed I could do. And then I started also doing all the other things that you do when you're in publishing. And so I was freelance editing, and I also did indexes, which it turned out to be fun for me. I guess I'm kind of anal. And so one of the publishers that I did an index for, she said she was happy with it. And I said, you know what I really do is write books, which was kind of a stretch. And
Mhm.
so they had a new series, and this was Children's Press at the time when it was in Chicago. And she tried me out, and I wound up doing 11 books for Children's Press.
Wow.
And then I wanted to see if I could go anywhere else. I didn't want to get stuck there, even though I enjoyed everyone there. And so I started sending my stuff out, and the rest is sort of history. Um,
It's amazing. That's because most people get rejection slips when they send out their
oh,
content.
yeah.
And so tell us, what does it take? I mean, you make it sound real easy. You went smoothly from being in special ed to all of a sudden freelance
Mhm.
writing, and now you're writing all the time. What are the qualities that people need to know in order to be successful?
I think you have to have a little bit of drive and a little bit of creativity. And I think with any freelance field, you have to have the ability to say yes to anything that comes your way and then go learn how to do it. And in the beginning, that's what I did. I joined organizations with people who were doing what I wanted to do. And also, once I got into the business, because my emphasis was on children and writing for children, I would join groups where I would kind of be the only. So if any job came in and it was related to children, people thought of me. So it was a two-pronged thing, a group that would support what I'm doing with other people who are more experienced, and then also joining a group that was allied but not quite. And those things helped. In the first group with people who were doing what I wanted to do, when I would get a job, like one of the first jobs I got was proofreading, which wouldn't have been that big a deal. But then they said, we want you to do it in the office. And I panicked. And I called up someone who was a freelance editor who was wonderful. And she said, go get the University of Chicago Manual of Style and cut out the pages on proofreading and bring a cheat sheet with you. And that's what I did. And then and another example again was indexing. I didn't know what to do with that. And I called up the same person and she said, go to the U of C Manual of Style and read the chapter on indexing. So a lot of this stuff was by the seat of my pants.
Wow.
So
What
you
is
have to kind
indexing?
of,
Can you
huh?
clarify what does indexing mean for those who don't know that?
Okay, an index is what a lot of people ignore at the back of the book. But if you're doing research or you want to find something in the book quickly, you go to the back and you look up the labels that you think might relate to what you want and see which pages we're on. So that's invaluable. Like for publishers, if you're looking at Writer's Market or Children's Illustrated and Writer's Market. In the back of the book, you could look up the category of writing that you do, and then you know which publishers to look up in the book to see if they would be interested in what you have to offer.
I see. So you're doing everything from proofreading and indexing, doing all the research to actually doing the writing.
Yes, I even had a research job, which was one of my first jobs. I met somebody in one of these organizations, and she had an education newsletter that was established, and she wanted somebody to research some of her articles. So there's all kinds of things you can do for experience. I even went to one of the early Chicago women's working conventions, and I heard a woman speak who was doing a book interviewing women on what they think of certain words.
Hmm.
And I thought, I really need experience interviewing. And so I didn't get paid, but I met some wonderful women who invited me out to lunch, and then I would interview them. And ultimately, the woman left town and didn't publish her book, but it was good experience for me. So you have to
Sure.
be flexible, willing to do lots of different things to get going. But that's not, I mean, it's my experience and background. It's not necessarily um, what I do now, which is mainly writing books and
Yeah.
more for children. Yeah.
So tell us some of the tips in writing an excellent book. What are the structural things people need to know? Because first, let's talk about the different types of books that you've written, and then what would
Okay.
make a good book.
Okay, more of my work is nonfiction. I do have a couple middle grade novels, but usually, and I've got tons of manuscripts that nobody's been interested in, like for picture books. But okay, so you've got picture books, you've got older picture books, which is means it's more pages, and then middle grade books, which can all this can be fiction and nonfiction. And then there's young adult books, which now has leaned more toward almost adult. And then, of course, adult books. And I've written at all different levels. And one of the things I do for that, well, my special ed training helped with that because I taught kids who were at all different levels. So I can kind of target the language and the sentence length and things like that. But for somebody who doesn't quite know that and they're working for a publisher that likes to target grade levels for whatever they're putting out, there are word books that you can buy or find in the library that'll give you a word and the approximate grade level that it's for, and that helps when I'm writing at different levels. And then I also read. I think reading's the most important thing. When I first started writing books, I started reading all the Newbery winners. And it was interesting back then because in the 70s it was realism and everybody died in the book. I think there was one book that I just lost count. It was crazy, but there are Newbery winners going back to the 1920s, and it was interesting to read those, and it kind of gave me an idea what maybe other people thought were good books. And then when I have an assignment that was at a different level, I would go read books in the library at that level so that I could again get the grade level by sentence length and word choice and how things were described.
Wow, you really have quite a wide range of books. Tell us before we dive into the structural parts of what makes a good book. Tell us some of your favorite, if you can pick favorites. It's almost maybe like picking a favorite child. But what are some of the types of books that you've written? Tell us, or the names of some of your books.
Okay, one of the most fun, because people would say, "What are you writing about?" And I'd say The Tooth Fairy, and they would kind of look at me like I needed to be somewhere institutionalized. But one of the most fun books was this one, Tooth Tales from Around the World, and this one got somewhere in the 40s for rejections,
Huh?
and it's essentially a combination of the history of the Tooth Fairy and also a history of different how the Tooth Fairy got started, where it came from, and then also Tooth Tales from Around the World. And initially, it was something different, and it kept getting revised. Revision is a big thing that writers do if you're honest about your work. And so I would put something away, come back, and say, okay, this. And in the olden days, people used to sometimes write why they didn't like something to encourage you. And I wasn't as good as picking up on those messages, but those would also, some of the written review kinds of things would be good for me to change direction or whatever. And certainly this got a lot of rejections. But I was pretty stubborn because back then there really weren't any Tooth Fairy books out. And I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. We've all gone through the Tooth Fairy, or at least most of us in the United States,
Right.
and certainly we all lose our baby teeth. So I kept sending it out, and eventually it got accepted, and it won a Children's Choice Award, which kind of vindicated me that I was on the right path. So that's one favorite.
I love that. I
I've
love that.
also, yeah, my most recent one has a long story too that I'll try and this is Jane Addams, the most dangerous woman in America, and this one just came out within the last couple of weeks. And Jane, I wanted to write about when I first started writing and got into writing biographies, which I like. And but at that time in the olden days, two writer buddies had written books about Jane Addams that had just come out, and I thought I prefer to write about people that nobody knows about than reinvent the wheel. It didn't feel right to me. And so I kept that thought in the back of my mind. And then a couple years ago, because it does take a long time for a book to come out, I had sent a proposal to a publishing company that I had worked with. I had just done Dolores Huerta Stand Strong for Ohio University Press. And I just kind of liked being with them. They were smallish, they were friendly, and they had this series of biographies, in middle grade biographies, which just seemed to fit what I wanted to be doing now. But I sent this the most dangerous women at Hull House, and they said, we really don't know how to market a series right now. Would you be interested in writing a book about Jane Addams? And I went, whoa, would I? Because it had been decades since my friends had written books. And so that's how that one kind of came to be. Um, and also Dolores taught me that it's much better to write about dead people, because she was a difficult woman, even though she does marvelous things. Another book that I'm really, when I think of people who are unknown, when I was working on a book about that, I used to do a lot of curriculum related books for educational publishers. And one publisher would send me around a state to do a state book. And so I would pick the ones that, Illinois and Indiana, and I forgot what the third one was. And so I was in Indiana, and I got to Indianapolis, and I saw big signs saying Major Taylor Velodrome. And I didn't even know what a velodrome was, which is a bicycle racing track.
Oh,
And I figured, who is this Major Taylor to get his name on something so big, whatever it is? And so I went back and did some research, and I found out that there was a young boy actually called Marshall Major Taylor, and his nickname was Major, and he was like the Lance Armstrong, which people more our age would know about, of the turn of the last century, the 1890s, 1910s. And excuse me, and nobody knew about him. And a lot of it was because he was black, but he was before all the major black sports figures. And at one point he was like a huge earner in the field, and he raced all over the world, and people in France and Australia know him. There was a movie made about him, about his time in Australia, but here there was so much prejudice that
huh.
we just didn't know. Now there are major Taylor bicycle associations all over the country. I think there's in the 50s, the number 50. So he's one that I really liked writing about, and I was able to uh, get this book back in print and do it in paperback, because this particular publisher only first didn't push it, but also did very expensive hardcover books. So when it went out of print, I got my rights, which is a whole other thing.
Mhm.
And I decided to republish it myself, which I know, Lynn, you know more about than I do. And so that just came out, and I wanted to show you, but I sold them all out the last place I went. So,
Oh my gosh.
uh,
So what you're saying is you, as a writer, as a best-selling, award-winning writer, you have to always be open to any ideas and present them and have that courage to go up to somebody. They're not all going to say, yes, we would like you to write a book on Jane Addams. You have to often have those ideas first and present them to different publishing companies. And then once
right,
you have the relationships, I imagine then they can come back to you and say, Marlene, will you write a book on a certain topic? Is that
right,
how it works?
right. And then you can choose or not choose depending
Yeah.
on what your interests are.
So tell us,
Um,
what do you think makes a book a compelling book, a good book? What are the elements in the story that you feel are important to have?
okay. My initial response is you should ask my readers, not me. But
Well,
but
you
I
know.
know that there are elements in a story. First, I, I go for a compelling character, and for me, most of my books um, have been about children, or as they get older, people who have done amazing, ordinary things that nobody notices.
Hmm.
And I want children to know that what they do matters. I also want to write more women into history. So that's what I'm pretty much doing, like Dolores Huerta, Jane Addams, and there are several others that have lots of women, that are women biographies. Um, I'm trying to think. Okay, so we got to have a compelling character or a reason
Mhm.
that you that the author thinks that the person is compelling. And then for me, part of the fun is the research. And then I'm looking to plug in, well, what kind of environment did this person live and work in that contributed to what I think is important about them. So we've got setting, we've got character, we've got hopefully a good storyline. I think even though I write more nonfiction, I think good nonfiction reads like a good story,
Mhm.
like fiction. And so that's really important to me, to make things make sense, to make them flow, things like that.
So do you create an outline with the end in mind first or do you just kind of go after you do research, just kind of go with the flow and see where the ideas take you? What is your process?
It's kind of both. For longer books, or like when I wrote for adults, or even when I have to write a nonfiction proposal, I kind of have to have an outline.
Hmm.
It'll change, uh, it'll change with what's going on with the publisher. It'll change when I start writing, but basically, any publisher that you're proposing to needs to have some idea that you can put your thoughts together, you could put words together in a sentence, and that you know what you want to do so that they can know if it fits in. A lot of times, rejection is not because of the author or who was ever proposing to be their author. The rejection is if it fits into somebody's catalog. Like with Tooth Tales from Around the World, at the same year, after having no books about tooth fairies or tooth tales, two books came out, and two picture books,
Wow.
and mine wasn't exact. It wasn't the same style, but it was something that, if a publisher wanted a tooth book, I don't know how that,
Wonder if the word
and so
spread, someone said,
it,
"Oh, look, we're thinking about doing tooth books." Who
it
knows?
could be, or we're getting these crazy proposals.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in them if we're getting so many. Um, Also, one thing, if you're interested, a way that I got in was
Mhm.
through an educational publisher, and I was able to look at lists or look at existing series and see what was missing and see if it was something I wanted to be interested in. And that was another way of proposing that I write a book for a publisher and that they might be interested in hiring me. So that was something that I could do back then. I've also had an experience where I did that for a publisher got back to me after I'd sent a proposal. And they weren't interested in my specific proposal, but they wanted to know if I would write for specific series. And against my better judgment, I did a sample because they wanted samples from a few people. And they ultimately chose someone who had an agent, which is a
Oh,
whole other thing, agent versus non-agent. So I had never experienced that with educational publishers before. I'm not sure if this one I don't think it was specifically educational, but which might mean why they preferred somebody who had an agent. I don't know.
wow. So you're really bringing up some good points here. To get in a foot in the door, it might be a good idea to go to an educational publisher first, and then you still have to know how to create a powerful proposal or query letter, as well as
Yes.
keep being perseverant through all the rejections, because most people do get rejections. Even you, after having published so many books, have still had
Oh, yeah.
rejections. You
Yeah, I'm still getting them.
So tell us a couple. Yeah, well, I'm surprised. But what can I say? Tell us a little bit about how does one write an effective query letter or proposal? Do they still have a chance? Can an unknown without an agent have a chance to get their story published? And how would you
Yeah,
recommend to do that?
there are lists of publishers that don't require agents. And that's the kind of thing that you can find in Children's and Illustrators Market. Also, if you're really serious about writing for children, I would suggest joining Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, because each state has a local branch, and some of them are very active, like ours in Illinois is very active, and you can get their newsletter. You can also get what they call the book, and they update it regularly. As part of your membership, you go on their main website and you click the book, and here's like, what is that, 100, 150 pages? But you can go to the different chapters that you need and read that. And that's a little more, that they also have lists of publishers in the back, and some of them will say if they will take unsolicited manuscripts. There are also a couple online vehicles for if you sign. I should have gotten the name for you, but I'm
That's
sorry. But
okay.
if you sign up for them, what's it called? I don't know. Maybe you'll know. And you can submittables one submittable.com, and you go there and you see if a publisher you're interested in is listed, and you can submit through submittable. So that requires you to keep checking back because they're going to respond to submittable, not to you. Another problem, though, that shouldn't get you down, but sometimes it can, is that publishers don't respond like they used to. It used to be you would get a letter, even if it was crummy, you'd get a letter of rejection. Then that stopped. Then I used to do this little trick of I printed out postcards
Right.
with a check off. And I would send those with the manuscript because it was cheaper, and I would get a response that had some kind of some kind of direction on that, and that helped. And then now everything is online, and sometimes you'll send something to a publisher, even if they say they take on agent in, and you will get absolutely no response. Some publishers will say, I mean, when you're submitting, always go to the publisher's submitting web page. And because even you can read thousands of books that tell you what to do, but you need to go to each publisher's web page and see what they want you to do and how they want you to do it, because sometimes they're a little different. And the same with how to define different grade levels. Different publishers will have different age spans. They'll have different word counts for each level of books that they're putting out for different readers. So all this information needs to be checked back with the original page. But anyhow, the SCBWI word book, once they get information from a publisher or they see that it changes, they just automatically update it. So it's more recent than if you got a book like Children's Writers and Illustrators Market or Writers Market, and both of those are at your local library. So
Right. So what you're saying,
it's a
for those who
beginning.
don't know, so SCB, I was going to clarify, SCBWI stands for Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And what
Yes.
Marlene is saying is they can keep updating their content because it's online versus if you buy a book like Writer's Market, which is published once a year, it's right. I think it's just once a year. So then you don't know the changes that are happening during that year. But
Right.
scbwi.org is the website if you're wanting to get help in how to write or illustrate and get your book out published. Marlene also has brought up a good point that you want to research each of the publishers because some of them are looking for specific types of writing and specific types of books. Could you give us just a brief, like, little overview of what makes a good query letter or proposal after you've done the research and you find the right, find a number of publishing companies that would be the right one for your book?
Okay.
What do you put in your query?
You're going to hear different things from different people. And if you read different books and how to's, they're going to say a little bit different and they're going to say, this is the only way to do it. I think one thing in publishing you need to remember is there is no one way. You essentially have to be a good writer. And you have to have something, a topic or whatever that a publisher wants. And that's the bottom line. I used to be in a writer's support group, which I wholeheartedly recommend. And that was a group of people, and some of us were published and some of us weren't. And we would critique each other's writing. And a lot of the more experienced people dropped out, and I stayed in because I figured everybody's evaluation is valuable. Until one time I went, and the woman told me that I used the wrong typeface, and maybe she mentioned paper stock. I don't know, something like that, which is, of course, doesn't count now. And I just looked and I said, I'm the only one of you guys that's published. I must have had about 30, 40 books out by then. And I thought, no, no, this is not for me. This is, there is no dogma here. But you do need for a query, and I think I still haven't gotten the difference between a query and a proposal, except that the query, a lot of people say keep it to one page or one and a
Right.
half pages. And the proposal is something that, if it's anything longer than a picture book, needs to be needs to be outlined and each section defined with a sentence or two. So
Right.
those would be the two differences for me. Both need to have a tagline at the top. Pretend you were doing an elevator pitch and because you cornered some publisher in an elevator. Once you got one sentence, doesn't even have to be a full sentence, to say what your book is about as a teaser and something to entice people. And that's what I put underneath the title. And then
And you come
what
up with
the
a title for your manuscript, for the story, right? For the
yes, it yeah, and it often gets changed, and that's just something you'll have to deal with in the publishing process. Things get changed, but that's a whole other issue. The query has to say um, what you're proposing, why you're proposing it, a little bit about the competition and how your proposal is different, and why you're the best person to be proposing it.
right.
Um, and even if you don't have credentials, because not everybody has a gazillion books, any writing that you've done, any groups you're in, if you're in a writer support group, if you anything that involves writing and publishing can be why you're the person to write it, or maybe this happened to you, or maybe this happened to a friend and you were really affected by it. Anything that gives you the street creds to be doing this.
That's so helpful. Marlene, you've given so much information here, some really great tips for people who want to be a writer. So let us know, where can people find out more about you? And not only do you write, but you give talks about writing. Where's your website, and where should they go to learn more?
It's marlenetargbrill.com. So it's Marlene, T is in Tom, ARG is in George, BRILL.com. And there is at the end, I think there's my email address. So if you have, any more questions, feel free to call me. And
That's
see what you
great.
think. It's got most of my books listed in some form, the most
Incredible.
recent or not. So
So before we go, I love to ask my guests, what would you like people to remember? What would you like people to remember about being a children's author, or and any author, because you've written all types of books, whether it's the qualities, what it takes to be a writer, or things you want people to remember? What would you message you want to say?
I think the most important thing I usually tell people is patience and persistence, because you need patience to get all those rejections and still keep at it, which is the persistence part. But also patience once you get someone who's giving you a contract. It can take years before the book comes out. At this point in my life, since I'm getting older, I tell people, hey, you got to bump up that publishing process because I want to live to see this book out. But that's a whole other issue that most people don't have. And then persistence to just keep going in the face of rejection or in the face of not getting any message at all. You gotta keep believing in yourself. That's the most important thing.
Yes, patience, persistence, and believing in yourself. Those are great qualities, great things to remember. I see all the books behind you. I love it. So
Yeah, they're not all mine,
that's
honestly.
okay. So remember that you all make a difference, and Marlene Targ Brill is making a difference too, and she's inspiring each of us to go out and share our story, or the stories that are in our heart, because people need to hear those stories and get inspired by them. Thank you, Marlene, for your kindness to come here together and for your willingness to share your story. I'm inspired by you all the time, and I just want to thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you for this interview. It's been fun. And I hope
Great.
some people get something from it.
I think they will. Thank you, and have a great day. Thanks.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.